We're back on Take 3 at Security Guy Radio Black Hack 2016 with my guest.
Lance James.
And Flashpoint.
At Flashpoint.
Is it flash-point.com or just Flashpoint?
It's flashpoint-intel.com.
Oh, okay, good. Good. Got to get the website. All right. So, what's your background?
My background is, previous to this, I was head of cyber intelligence for Deloitte, which came off an acquisition of a company where I was both director of intelligence and chief scientist for, called a company called Vigilant, where I built their threat intelligence into their SIM and their real-time aggregation systems. Well, so we built that.
You seem awfully young to do all that.
Yeah, so prior to that, I started a company and then ran it for 9 years, which was one of the earlier threat intelligence companies, I think before we even called it threat intelligence.
Yeah.
And it was called Secure Science, and we focused more around, like I would consider it more like a counterintelligence company. We would service financial, government, things like that, but we do a lot of consulting for like law enforcement back in the early days when it was like just coming out and people were trying to understand it. So
the not cool days to be in.
Correct, and I would take the research that, I was into this, I was obsessive about it.
How did you get into this?
Well, ever since I was 8, I started programming.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a cross between music and computers, actually. I started music at 5. And so I just was kind of always into it, and I've had a protective nature for a long time, just as a person. So I started a company around 23, 24 years old, and kind of made a model out of the research I was doing about like tracking bad guys down, right, and keep an eye on them.
So let's talk about that research. Any latest that Flashpoint's come out with?
Yeah, so Flashpoint actually has come out with a few things. One on health hacking. Ransomware, as you saw, hit the health industry. We've been doing a lot of analysis on the ransomware actors, including how much they're actually making. Like the average ransomware is only making, like the authors or the distributors are only making about $90,000 a year. Now in the Eastern Bloc, where a lot of that's coming from, is still a decent amount of money. Right? What is a fascinating fact is that a lot of the high-tier organized criminals in Russia do not like ransomware. Right, so they actually think it is like the lowest form of attack, and it's ruining their
ruining their business.
Their businesses, right? And then on the other side, we did some work on ISIS and what tools they're actually using and how they're upgrading to using more security tools, down to like PGP messaging now, which is new. They're still kind of like,
they're moving away from the Xbox communication encrypted channels.
That was that's and that was of course a lot of hype around that. But we're actually getting an understanding of what actual tools they're using. Like they're using anti-forensics tools like secure deleters. They're focusing on encrypted apps, of course, as everybody else is using them as well. And if you notice, as the media has brought attention to them because of the concern of encryption, it only brings light to them as well. So we see an increase or an uptick in use because then they actually see, they're media sensitive, so they see it too.
So we were talking before the show about what you think the biggest challenge is in all this. And you talked about how our threat analysis is not where it should be. Explain that.
So the issue with it is we're used to indicators, MD5s, hashes, IP addresses, domains, right? Which are only 4 sets. And when you think about it, you get all that information into an environment to react on, right? And when I say react, it's because it's usually an indicator of compromise. You saw this as a collective. Now the information sharing side is good. That's great that we have that, right? Yeah. But the other side of it, it's how many advanced attackers are going to use the same exact techniques every single time. They wouldn't be advanced if they were. And every organization is breached in a different way. It requires casing the joint, recon, all this stuff. And they have to then build out a planning and direction that they're going to go into. How are they going to get into the systems, right? So what happens is by the time you get that data, it's usually diluted, right? So it's not always diluted, right? There is some, obviously we wouldn't be doing it if there wasn't credit to threat intelligence the way it is today. But the issue with it, it's cyber threat intelligence, which is a bit limiting anyways, right? So you only make the decisions on the operation ability of, do I lock out an account? Do I, block this proxy?
It's kind of after the fact, really.
It is after the fact, and it is active response. It is a response. The limitations there is, one big limitation also is operationalizing it very quickly across all of your systems out there, right? So that's been a challenge. Also, how do you decide what you're going to make a decision? You got to remember what intelligence is about. It's about getting enough information analyzed so that you can make a sound decision, right? Actionable decision, preemptive decision in most cases, right? What's the point of intelligence if it's after the fact in most cases? So that's just journalism, right?
Yeah.
So where we're trying to take it, right, is we've applied more like human access, right, with combination of obviously technologies, where we basically, get all of the deep and dark web, where the planners are, where the guys are actually maybe building a new ransomware that isn't out yet. And we can maybe even cause an impact by saying, hey, this is going on, let's collaborate with law enforcement, and they knock it out. right?
Do you have intel resources infiltrated into the cyber criminal groups underground?
Yes, that's a constant maneuver, right? So in general, we kind of have to be the bad guys,
Yeah.
right? That's our job, right?
Right.
And so we have obviously, our SME analysts. They feed into that, and then they feed into the technology. So as they're monitoring, we're then suddenly it goes into our collection systems, right? And then basically, then our customers have access to that data to search almost like a Google for the deep and dark web. But this also protects them when you think about it. It's kind of raising it up from cyber threat intelligence to business risk intelligence, because now they can actually, one, be kind of a proxy through us. They don't have to actually put their own businesses at risk by going in the underground, dealing with that. Two, they can make stronger, like strategic decisions. Like, let's give an example, physical security threats, right? You want to know about, like, well, we're going to be throwing an event. What is this going to, are there issues? Are we the type of organization that might upset someone, like an animal activist or a terrorist group or an insurgency or hacktivism, right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about it today, hackers, like, the hacking that's going on, a lot of it is about influence. It's about changing things, right? And so that's one of your biggest threats, right? So what we're doing is actually applying it to the business, like across the board. It's not stuck to cyber, which is just a domain, land, air, space, sea, cyber, but it affects things kinetically. As we've said before with DNC, we see that that's influenced the outcome. Obviously, those emails have changed opinions. You saw the DNC, you saw booze on one side.
It's forever changed the political fabric of our
it has,
country.
and that plays into everything, right? So it's psychological operations. If it is, what they say they believe it is Russia, it could play into how that affects. Even if it isn't Russia, it still has a psychological, like you said, social fabric that goes on there.
Now, I'm so glad you said this. I've been preaching this for a long time. I had a first computer in '84, 2 floppy drives. I used to build them, order them from Zoom, put them together. I'm no genius, but my mom didn't raise any dumb kids, all right? I could never get law enforcement to put together the fact that they got to talk to IT and they got to work together, right? Because just putting a code out there that says, look, I caught a packet, and that packet means this, we're going to turn it off automatically. You got to put the people in with the intel and the human factor to analyze it.
Correct.
So the cops are the guys in the beat that say, I think this means this is his behavior, and the IT guy says, I caught a little bit of information to go look at. How did you come up with that at your age without a law enforcement background? It's very fascinating because most people don't put that connection together.
So actually, it was interesting what I was doing when I was younger doing it.
You're playing cops and robbers when you were younger.
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
What I actually literally did was go straight to, I got introduced to the FBI, and I said, let's do some oversight, because that was actually where my highest value was. So actually what happened is a friend of mine who is in the hacker scene saw value into what I was doing, and I wrote articles on some of the attacks we'd been seeing in the early days.
Yeah.
And then what happened was he introduced me and said, where your work is valuable is to connect those pieces.
Connect the dots, that's right.
Right, so basically I got to give credit to a friend to actually help me get into the contact, but actually that's one of the things that I've been doing through all of my work is that, having that oversight, over time you also get to learn their laws, you get to know how to do this without...
How to integrate successfully.
Correct, right, because there's legal operations too, right? There's, I did a talk last week on hacking back with Rob Joyce, who's the chief of tailored access operations at NSA. We were talking about like the legal implications and all of these things, and it's not like you can't sit there and just go, oh, hacking back's okay. But there are ways to have legal oversight on progressive creative exploitation, right? So it's the same thing here, is you got to merge those two. One of the things that I've actually seen is whether it's the intelligence community, whether it's law enforcement, and InfoSec, a lot of that, and as you know, culturally there's some divide sometimes with that. But when you get those, like the InfoSec hackers together with law enforcement, it becomes a marriage I've never seen before.
It's very powerful.
It's very powerful, right? And it's a skill set, that both sides learn. Right. So, for instance, I've learned a ton about like certain laws and like certain how you can work with those laws and how you still, make sure that you content with privacy and you don't
because you can give me the data, but if I can't use it for probable cause, I can't prosecute the guy.
Right.
And every IT guy I ever talked with at the studios would tell me, look, you tell me what you want the computer to do, and I'm going to make it do it. What I don't know is how you come up with this crap.
Right.
How do you know that guy's a bad guy? Well, I just have a feel for bad guys because of my background. And you have a feel for the IT stuff, and you know the ones and zeros. And you got to put those two together, and when you do it, kabam, it wins, right? Do you find there's still a lot of companies that aren't doing that? We're moving that way, but what's wrong with the model? Why isn't it there yet?
The model is also, there's a divide between public and private sharing.
Absolutely.
Right? So let's not even talk about classified information, right? Which is already its own difficult problem, right? Which is understandable. But just being able to, like, some organizations look at if we get law enforcement involved, there's liability.
Exactly.
There's leakage of someone mentioning it something, and even though we have regulations in the book that allow them to not announce until they've finished investigation, things like that. Obviously, every breach hurts the image of a company. It makes an impact to them, and actually, sometimes that's the bigger impact.
Right.
Again, DNC, we saw a resignation right at the top.
Yeah.
Right. So. And so then FBI is investigating, or this or that, right? And so it becomes very difficult because that relationship, one, has not been catered well. There are organizations that are working on it, like NCFTA works on it. There's a few, like the ISACs, like the information sharing groups out there they're trying to get that more. But there's a lot of obstacles really when it comes down to almost like it's a language barrier in some ways.
That's a good point.
Right?
That's
You know what I mean?
point, yeah.
And culturally, again, in our climate, there's been some shift and there's some concerns, and there's some organizations don't want to, like we saw the Apple and FBI. They want to look like we're not having government in our backyard, and this is for marketing reasons.
Yeah, it's all kinds of reasons. And they're valid reasons, by the way.
Yeah, they're valid reasons,
right?
And they have to sell their product, and they don't want to feel like, hey, and then they feel like FBI needs evidentiary burden, right? Like you have to do your job, right? So at that same time, there's obviously some stressors there that become difficult. But there is stuff going on. There are vetted groups, and just some of it's informal, but there are groups that they are communicating back and forth and sharing information. We've seen nowadays the FBI puts out PIN reports, Secret Service and DHS put out like these private informational reports out there that are kind of like, hey, we see this threat, we see this going, and there's improvement along the way. I've seen it literally from the last 3 to 5 years before to now. The time to value of the intelligence from the government side is a little bit closer than it used to be.
That's good.
Because they probably have to go through all the process to even release that information.
Bureaucracy.
It's bureaucracy. And organizations have it too. And so some of it's just natural bureaucracy, right?
Right.
And you got to remember, almost every organization has a set of lawyers. And their best word is no in most cases because they're to protect the company and the risk, right? So
now, do you find that in law enforcement, the younger police officers coming in, that were the generation that grew up with computers, are becoming more accepting to this and adaptable, right? Mm-hmm. Because the people my age are now the chiefs,
right?
And their word is no, I don't get it,
right?
So
well, they're trying.
They're trying, and they know they have to do it, by the way. But if you don't understand, it's very hard to say yes,
right?
So, what is your biggest challenge when you're trying to push this on a police department? To say, listen, you got to do it. Let me break it down for you. And let's go get the 25-year-old who you can sit next to and explain it to.
The biggest challenge is the same challenge the law enforcement has, convincing the lawyers we can do it, right?
In that case, it's the city lawyers, whatever.
Right, or state or federal, right?
Okay,
I work a lot with more like AUSAs, right?
Okay.
So, because sometimes, because of the non-understanding, there's over-ambition on the law enforcement side.
Right.
We want to bust this whole thing out and da-da-da, but some of the just controlling those processes, as it's like think of a sting operation. It gets very difficult, lots of planning, things like that, right? So sometimes it's more being patient and chipping away at each problem over time. And of course, people feel like, oh, well, law enforcement's not doing anything. Well, they are, but there's also their obstacles, and then we have the same obstacles. And there's also on the when I'm looking at the younger generation. So I have a buddy, he came out of school and I was mentoring for a little bit. He actually was amongst a bunch of computer scientists with a justice degree that he was working on. And he had the challenge, but he was persistent about, getting there with the computer stuff. So I helped him and I'm like, hey, and he was underestimated because I said, look, a guy like that in the force is just enough to be dangerous in a good way, but also will understand the law.
That's right.
And so that balance of maybe promoting more people that are, like, for instance, if they do decide to work at like the Secret Service, the FBI, they got clearances they have to go through. And in that time, they could maybe make programs that allow people to train them up on the cyber stuff while they're waiting on this clearance.
There's something about law enforcement, and I was one for 14 years, so I can speak ill of them to a degree and get away with it, right? My friend Paul still does not use Quicken to balance a checkbook. He takes the statement and does it by hand. It's like, who does that, right? And there's a certain age group where they're just not interested in it.
Right. It's what you know. It's
but
your
even
habits,
the younger guys, though, if you're drawn to law enforcement, you're not necessarily drawn to computers. It's a weird thing.
You don't necessarily see the thing is about the computers, though.
Different discipline.
That's what I love about it, though. Is like, for instance, when you work with law enforcement, when you get down to it, it's still when you actually come down to solving cases, it's still no different in the sense of
exact same process. You're absolutely
right. It's the same process, and it still works. The difference is the process now has to be a little bit more agile. Your adversary or your bad guy is moving around and sometimes taunting you or this or that, right? but it's the actual detective work. So for instance, let's go back to Flashpoint, right? So when we deal with human intelligence on cyber, right, which is our business risk intelligence model, it's some of it's technical, but most of our analysts are also come from the intel community world. Some of them military, some of them ex-law enforcement, or this and that. And then it also combined of InfoSec, right? So they all kind of work together, but like, for instance, the InfoSec people, again, learn a lot from the process of intelligence, right? What's my, how do we deliver this, or how do we understand about, XYZ in intelligence that might be different from that, or understanding the laws and liaison work between law enforcement. Now, because we have experience of people who've done that, it bridges the gap more. We work with organizations that also focus on bridging, like I said, NCFTA, which is the National Cybercrime Training Forensics Alliance, is really a nonprofit focused on bridging law enforcement and public and private companies together, so that there's like a nonprofit in the middle that can help kind of work that out. So working with, it really comes down to community, right? When you think about
it, makes
right?
sense, yeah.
And you just share your information. Just this, Black Hat is a community, right? We share information, right? All of us come from different fields. Some people are radio frequency guys, right? And I might not know anything about how they do it, but I'm going to be like, wow, and I'm going to learn, right?
Yeah.
And I might come from a different round. I'm going to meet a crypto guy, I'm going to meet this, and they're going to all come from something where they're sharing. Well, this works. How many years now, right? So the same
Over
thing here is it's
25,
really building a community, right?
Oh, I'm happy to hear it. So I'll close with a funny story. We got a minute left. At Culver City PD, where I used to work, they still call their dispatch center a CAD, which stands for Computer-Aided Dispatch.
There you go.
Do you think you can drop the word computer? I mean, is that a magic thing? It was magic when it came out, by the
But
way.
it is a computer.
Oh, we got a computer now. Because literally, when I started as a cop, we did our logs on a typewriter.
Right.
Okay, selective 2.
Right.
It's the same system from the 80s. They haven't upgraded it yet.
Yeah, that's
That's
So the
problem.
mindset is kind of like, okay, you could probably dispatch better with your smartphone, literally, but they're trying.
Yeah,
So-
when you think about these problems, both on the security breach and not side, right? Security is a people problem, right?
It's always
Absolutely.
people.
It's not
At the end of
like
the day.
computers can't update themselves,
right.
right? The blinking lights are moving and doing whatever they're told to do, but it really comes down to keeping up with the times. But at the same time, it's just trying to get all of that stuff.
I'm
going.
so happy to
So,
hear that these things are going forward. Give us your name one more time.
Lance James,
And Lance, your company.
Flashpoint.
Thanks for coming on Security Guy Radio. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Lance.
it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
How was that?
It was excellent.
All right, cool, sweet.
Excellent. No, I worry about this stuff because a lot of the companies, they just say, here's my plug-in, here's what we're going to do.